Settle down, brother. This is the Quarter Report. South Africa is a movie. Welcome to the watch party. Should billionaires be presidents? That is the question that many people have been thinking about, not just this year, but basically ever since Donald Trump was first elected president of the United States of America. Now, you may on one very basic level be thinking, Dan, anybody can be a president. And to that I say, yes, I'm not talking about whether they should be legally allowed to be presidents. I'm not suggesting some kind of law where we check all your assets. And if you're even a rand above $1 billion, how many figures is that? 10 figures. Yes, even a rand above 10 figures, you can't be a president. But there's an interesting debate here because the design of a democracy is that you separate powerful people and you make sure that they hold each other accountable so that no single kind of person or single group of people can come to dominate. So in a traditional democracy like South Africa, you've got the executive, which is the president and his or her ministerial team. Then you've got the legislature, which is all of the elected representatives, members of parliament, committees, and the rest. And then you've got the legal system, the judiciary. And they all have powers to keep each other accountable and make sure that no single part of the state dominates. But of course, then there's a whole other group of people who are incredibly powerful in all countries, which is the hyper wealthy, the people who've got an enormous amount of money, the business titans and the rest. And in general, you want the business titans to not come to supreme dominance either. You want them to have some power, just like the executive, just like the judiciary, just like the legislature, but have none of those rising to supremacy over the rest. Because as soon as one can run on its own, then you have dangerous levels of power in the hands of just a few people. For example, when Elon Musk was the right hand, or when he was the real president of the United States of America until recently, when Trump was just welcoming in all of these hyper wealthy people and allowing them to run riot in the American government and manipulate the American government towards their own ends. Suddenly, America became a great example of big business just having too much power. And that continues in America. Some would say even now Musk has kind of made his exit. So why are we talking about this in South Africa? Because more and more Patrice Motsepe is being mooted to be the next president of the ANC and the country. More and more evidence is coming out that there is an agenda, there's a lobby group, there's a campaign within the African National Congress to get Patrice Motsepe to succeed President Cyril Ramaphosa. We already did a video on this last week and an episode that you can go watch or listen to back. But the basic summary is Patrice Motsepe is one of the wealthiest people, not just in South Africa, but in Africa. He's unbelievably successful. He has had connections to the African National Congress for a long time. He is Ramaphosa's brother-in-law. He is the president of the organizing body of football for the whole continent of Africa, which makes him internationally influential. He was involved in the prep of the South African delegation when they went to Qatar before going to visit Trump at the White House in that now infamous meeting. He is incredibly influential in politics. He's massive in business. He also is incredibly influential and involved in two key constituencies in South Africa, which is religious bodies, specifically Christianity, and traditional leadership, so like more traditional belief systems that originated in this part of the world. And all of that, along with the fact that he's not been in the ANC, so is not mired with the brush of all of the incompetence, corruption, and mess from the ANC in the last handful of years, puts him together as a pretty good-looking candidate for a lot of people. And since the news broke in the last few weeks that he might be put forward, we don't know whether he wants to, we don't know whether he will, but that there is a movement within the ANC to get him to succeed Ramaphosa, a lot of South Africans from all walks of life have said, that's sick. We like the idea of that, even as though there have been criticisms. And so today's episode, we're going to talk about a lot of the criticisms of Motsepe, which is broadly, do we want a billionaire to be in power? And over the last handful of days, we've been getting lots of messages on our WhatsApp line, 0607613436. That's the way you contribute to the show. Become a recorder by sending us a text or a voice note. And we're going to use maybe 6 or 7 of the messages in from recorders in our community to work through this issue of Motsepe and the issue of billionaires getting into power. And I'm going to start with Monty. Monty sent us this message, and I think it gets to the heart of one of the big debates here. Dan, I was disappointed by your characterization of Motsepe as this nice guy with useful skills. To be clear, that wasn't my characterization. That's the pitch that people in the ANC have been putting forward for him. Monty says, billionaires are only possible because of immense structural injustice in our society. Their existence is fundamentally and necessarily opposed to goals of poverty alleviation or genuine climate justice. The idea that a billionaire is ever even benign, let alone good for leadership, is a complete fantasy. We need analysis that evaluates people and projects against things that actually matter, like real social justice. Now, Monty, I hear you on that argument. The idea being that for anybody to accrue so much personal wealth, you need to have extreme inequality and potential for exploitation in society, such that all of the riches of business and companies and economic development fall into the hands of so few people. I hear that argument. But Monty, I have to say that there are some billionaires who do better for the world than others. Like there are just some billionaires, some wealthy people who are better for more people in society than others. I don't think the fact of somebody becoming a billionaire automatically means that they can't be a good force for society. But I think the debate is, should billionaires be allowed to be in such a powerful position in politics, considering billionaires are billionaires mostly because they've been extremely good at accruing personal gain and personal interest. So that's Monty's message. And we're going to come back to all of these themes as we keep moving through it. Then France on the WhatsApp line says, on the issue of Patrice Motsepe taking over as the president of ANC and maybe the country, I think the best thing for him to do is to form his own political party, stay away from the ANC, and then unite South Africa. France, I find that incredibly unlikely. I think someone like Patrice Motsepe, if he really wanted to be president, is not going to screw around trying to appeal to get people to go to a different party. Also, Jacob Zuma, I think still one of the most voted for people in South African history, started his own political party and did unbelievably well and only got 14%, 15%. So I don't think there's any chance of that. Dave says, I like a lot of Patrice's CV, but my big flag is how much opportunity this would present to African Rainbow Minerals. That's one of his companies. And then also Dave says, can we get a president that's not at retirement age? So important, not at retirement age. Although some people in their 70s, let's just say they're running stronger than other people in their 70s. Okay, then Amu says, hi Dan, another long message from me. On Motsepe potentially being ANC president and then South Africa's president, while I think he'd have amazing convening power regionally and internationally and could draw a huge amount of votes back to the ANC, I would be legitimately shocked if he did throw his hat in the ring. Imagine you're Motsepe, a multi-billionaire who enjoys almost godlike status in South Africa, would you rarely come down to the level of mere mortals and dirty your hands and reputation in the arena of politics? Politics is a dirty game and no one emerges from it unscathed, and I think by its nature, would dirty an otherwise impeccable reputation and legacy. Now, Amu, I hear you, but one thing about most humans, not just billionaires, not just hyper-successful people, but most humans believe that they can be the exception. And particularly successful people, particularly billionaires, believe that they are different. And sometimes they are a bit different from most people. And so I can see a world where someone like Patrice Motsepe goes, but I'm not like politicians. Maybe the argument for me is that I'm actually not a politician, even though he's had to show a lot of political acumen in a lot of the stuff that he's done, including becoming the president of the Confederation of African Football. But he and people like him think, I'm different, I won't be like this. And frankly, at that age, want to do legacy things. And maybe a legacy thing would be to become president of the country and from his perspective, make it a lot better than he feels like it is now. Okay, then we're going to get to our anonymous politics lecturer who says, hi, 2 things about Patrice that really irk me. 1, African Rainbow Minerals supplies Israel with coal. I did not know that. Interesting. 2, when party campaign funding data was released, it was disclosed that Motsepe donated to the EFF. Make it make sense? Flummoxed. Simple but important question that's got me all messed up. Why have billionaires increasingly wanted to move from the puppeteering position of donating to wanting to become presidents? The answer can't be for doing good. Best case scenario answer, late stage capitalist greed and self-interest. Yeah, I think that is the case. I think it is more and more possible, and there's a greater trend of big business buying off politics in the modern era than ever before. Lobbying groups have become more developed. Quiet money influencing has become more pronounced and set in and well-bedded across not only South Africa, but the whole world. And I think more and more hyper successful business people who frankly now have so much money that maybe their normal life is actually boring, then go, I could be president. I could go and do a better job than all these politicians are doing, and I could make it virtuous. Okay, so this is, I think, where we really get stuck into the debate. Pitso has 8 points, and I think they're all super important, so we're going to work through them. Hi, Dan. Now that you've covered the positive side of a potential Motsepe presidency, we deserve a follow-up program why South Africa should not elect billionaire Patrice Motsepe as its next president after the whole, he says, failed presidency of another billionaire, Cyril Ramaphosa. The dangers are many. 1, concentration of economic and political power. Too much power on the already powerful. It's what we've been talking about. 2, structural conflicts of interest. He's a bigger mining magnate than Cyril. Lack of environmental issue focus can be a disaster. And I think that that's super important, right? Because one of the things that you want in a politician is not to have vested business interests, because that is so quickly how they start acting for the best interests of their business, because it's their business, and not for the best interests of the people. 3, the global rise of oligarchic governance globally. Look what the tech bros did when Trump took over. The rich came together to screw everyone, as we've already mentioned on this show. 4, billionaires don't gel well with inequality politics. Their default position is to give tax breaks to the rich because they all fundamentally believe billionaires can help the poor. 5, democratic legitimacy crisis. Look how Musk used private capacity to destroy state institutions in America. He had his own computer geeks and security company to do what the state workers would agree to do. 6, state and regulatory capture and deregulation bias. Patrice will cut social welfare. We don't know that. We've never heard Patrice talk on anything that he would do, but that's possible. Although, given the tradition of the ANC and the extent to which the ANC relies on welfare to guarantee support and relevance and importance in many welfare recipients' lives, I'm not sure if he will consider cutting it and if the ANC will allow that. Ramaphosa hasn't. And you can imagine that Ramaphosa and Motsepe have chatted often and at length about how to run South Africa. Point 7 from Pitso, technocratic authoritarianism. This is interesting. So in brackets, Pitso says, his kind always excludes public participation. They think the state can be run by like a business. So that's interesting 2 ways. 1, a technocratic appointment is someone who is given a job in government because of a skill set that they have, a qualification that they have, a degree that they have. Maybe you put a financier in charge of the Department of Finance, stuff like that. And the argument about a technocratic appointment usually goes like this. On the one hand, they have the skills that make them very good at their jobs. Often it means that you get highly skilled people becoming ministers or in high positions of power where those skills are useful, rather than just a democratic political party deployment where you're passing these ministers through different departments and you don't even know if they've got anything to contribute. Like Angie Motshekga being Minister of Basic Education and then suddenly being Minister of Defense. Like, couldn't we have an education expert for one and then, a military expert in another? So that's the argument for a technocratic appointment, and it does make sense. But on the other hand, technocrats often do not feel led by a popular mandate that has been voted for. The point of a democracy is people get together and vote, and the majority of people's will wins, and then that will, whether it be in the education system or the military or the rest, is done. And the idea is that a technocrat will come in with their own ideas to do things differently when what those ministers and leaders are supposed to be doing is implementing the will of the people. And so that's the debate there. But the other thing that Pitso says in this point, which is slightly different, is his kind always excludes public participation. They think the state can be run like businesses. And that's where we go back to a lot of the discourse around Musk and Trump in the White House in the last, how long is it now? 6 months, 5-6 months or so, where you can't run a government purely like a business because there are lots of things that government need to do for people that are commercially non-viable or not, in other words, not particularly good business, because there are things that you have to do like crisis management, like emergency crisis management, like welfare, like public healthcare, like public education, which are not good business models for making money, but they are much better, often much better than businesses at providing for people who can't spend a lot of money to have private healthcare or private education. You can't run a government like a business because you need a government to be able to respond to people, look after them, and cater for their needs, even if it costs a little bit more money than the market rate at certain times to help people. So that's point 7. And then the final point that Pitso makes is policy prioritization issues. Billionaire leaders often prioritize economic growth metrics over social welfare indicators. Look at the US right now. And again, I think we've spoken about that, but that keys into if Patrice Motsepe were to be the leader of the ANC specifically, the ANC does care about economic growth, even though the DA will tell you they don't, but not at the expense of social welfare. Until ironically, recently with Budget 1 and 2, where they wanted to do VAT to try and find more money. So I think that actually is a really good cover summary of all of the different things we need to think about in terms of whether billionaires would make good presidents. And I think that something that I worry about in this case is that it's not just a billionaire becoming the president, taking political power to add to vast economic power. It's also a family affair. Like, it doesn't quite feel like a monarchy or kings and queens. And I know that Ramaphosa and Motsepe aren't blood related, but they're brothers-in-law. It's weird. It's really, really, really odd. And it reminds me of Jacob Zuma pushing behind Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma. I'm trying to promote Duduzile Zuma. I don't like politics moving in that kind of way.
I think for me, it's also a question. A lot of these points speak to it. Is almost like there's a morality factor around billionaires as well.
Right.
And as much as I think it was the anonymous politics lecturer, just going back to their point about African rainbow minerals, exporting to Israel, it's true. It is one of the several companies that are exporting minerals. And then there was also another point. I think it was Pizzo's point too, which was about, I guess, focusing more on mining and extractive things rather than environmental
of interests. Yeah.
And it's interesting because Patrice Motsepe obviously has, played it, I think, along with one of his capital investment firms, I think African Rainbow Capital Investment, as well as Standard Bank, into solar energy and renewable energy, about 10 billion rand, which is obviously a lot of money. But, does that offset the fact that he's exporting minerals or coal to Israel, for example, right?
And his traditional mining is his core business. Yeah,
exactly. And then it almost comes back to, there's something that I was thinking about with this morality around billionaires being in that position as well. And obviously a lot of points have been raised about, keeping that within some kind of weird echelon of hyper wealthy people then being in power, because often what then happens is, because you have all those business connections, that aspect is good for the country, but at the cost often of things like welfare and all these social elements, if you will. Then I was thinking about the Uruguayan president, Jose Mujica, I think his name was. He was, dubbed like the world's poorest president, for example, as like a counter argument for this whole thing. Because, he was, I think, donating 90% of his income as president to kind of social welfare programs,
and he was living on like
charity.
And he was living on like a small holding farm or something.
Yeah, would take his tractor out for a spin every now and then. Had the old Volkswagen Beetle that I think somebody wanted to buy for like $1 million or something, just because of the fame around it. But people like that, it's interesting because you then find that someone who has less money in this argument compared to like a billionaire also kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Is more sympathetic to the people and their struggles.
Total, dude. And empathy, basic empathy.
And it's a weird argument, though, because you might argue that someone who, maybe if we found a morally sound billionaire,
it
would make way more sense for them to give up 90% of their income or salary than
Bill Gates is about to do, apparently.
Right. So, and look, there's obviously some questionable things with Bill Gates as well.
Okay, so to be clear, I did not mean that Bill Gates is morally sound. I just meant that billionaires sometimes choose to give away all their wealth.
Yeah, but you could make the argument, though, that if you had like some kind of morally sound, whatever that means, billionaire, that it would make a lot more sense for them to think about the people and also give up some of their salary. And then also, it's just a weird argument for me, because you've got two sides of the same coin.
Yeah.
In the sense that sometimes you'll probably find someone who maybe, like if you take Jose Mujica, for example, could have taken all of his salary and then become rich and famous.
Yeah.
Whereas he chose not to. And then billionaires often choose to do the same thing which is just accumulate more personal wealth rather than because they have the amount of capital or whatever to give back to people. So there's like this weird like moral thing in my head about what that means when we think about, should billionaires be presidents? Yeah,
for sure. Because if billionaires really just objectively clearly want to do good, then they don't have to become president to do that.
Exactly.
I think is where we're at. Super interesting. Your WhatsApp line is going to be a buzz. Let me know what you think about all of this. The number is 0607613436. We'll certainly dig through any of the responses or further responses that haven't been spoken about on today's show tomorrow. Thank you so much for listening and watching. Chat on Friday.